This document links to the functions and equations and the calculus topics of the IB Maths course. On page 1.2 it shows that this gradient explorer or slope explorer allows you to explore just what is the gradient and how it's calculated for both straight lines and non-straight line graphs. So on page 2.1 what we have here is the ability to grab either of these points, and you can see that the gradient is effectively the vertical distance divided by the horizontal distance. When the line is sloping up, the triangle is yellow. Where it's sloping down, it's orange. And no matter which orientation you have, you start to see the behavior coming through. This is for students to recognize there's a key difference between lines which are sloping with a positive gradient and those which have a negative gradient. On page 3.1, if you set the animation in motion, you can see that the blue arrow is trying to get students to always look at a graph going from left to right and never anything else. So even when the diagram is updated and moved around, it's always going from left to right. So always think about going along and then up, never back and then down. On page 4.1, we have an opportunity of grabbing the red dot and we can move it around a curve, and students can see that the gradient at any particular point on a non-linear function, and here we have a quartic that's been generated by a scatter plot here, the gradient changes. There are interesting points when the gradient is 0 or near enough 0, and so where it cuts the x-axis is not really of any interest. This allows us to detect maximums and minimums. You can grab any of these points and change the shape of the function to something a bit more interesting without having to worry about the algebra that goes with it. On page 5.1 we have the same situation as before, except it's smoother, it's more continuous, so that when I grab these points I can change the graph more subtly. This construction is much better on the computer software. A handheld really struggles to keep up with the calculations. On page 6.1 we have a graph of the derivative, and again it's getting students to recognize that as they move the point along a top graph, the graph of the derivative down below changes accordingly, and again you can have complete control over the features of your original starting function to make it a bit more interesting without worrying about the algebra. So it's getting students to recognize the connections between the graph of a function and the graph of its derivative, and the red coloured dot shows you what's really going on. There we go, that's all it does.